This is a charming built-in bedroom set with elegant raised panels and a modern touch. But why is it built in if it's a furniture set? We will come to that answer and many others in this video while on the pursuit of outfitting a simple bedroom with a problem-solving design. Many customers often come to me having a problem, and luckily for them, a lot of the time I can provide solutions. Either through design or functionality, I can usually improve the way of life for that customer with my woodworking. This isn't just me though. This is probably you too. I imagine if you do any woodworking at all, or any job for that matter, you're probably improving the lives of other people in some form or fashion. So where am I going with this? I'm glad you asked. This customer has a simple problem that most of us have, and it's not always easy to remedy. She has a bedroom with limited space. I know, imagine that. Of course, a standard bedroom with barely enough room to walk around the queen bed as they used to build them. But she wants a bedroom set with shelving to display some decor, a matching headboard, some drawer storage, pull-out trays for phones, and even some strong crown to cap everything off. But we have one problem. The closet door on the west wall only allows for less than 12 inches of depth to work with. So the easy part has already been done. She has found a design that she wants copied. That's perfect. The hard part though is squishing that desired design into a small space. To begin this undertaking, the raised panels will first have to be made because two of them actually serve as sides for the nightstands. I'm milling up 8/4 maple here for thick panels. Here's a pro tip. If your push blocks have lost their grab, you can re-grip them using tack cloth. This cleans the surface well and adds some tack back. The stock I'm preparing will eventually be 1.5 inches, but I don't want it that thickness yet, so I'm going about 1/8 over. Then I can thickness them and cut them to rough width. This process will be releasing stresses in the wood as well as moisture, and the boards will warp slightly again. Now I can run them through another round to get things to final straightness and dimension. There are some 3/4 raised panels for the drawer faces and headboard that need to be glued up as well. I'm not using dominoes here because honestly I don't need them, and I would just run the risk of exposing them when cutting the raised profile. The thinner stock can be shaped to final dimension as well. We will be going over each part in detail so you will know what goes where. Now the raised panels are dry and can be unclamped. The glue squeeze out will cause milling issues, so a few swipes with a card scraper does the trick. Then these wide suckers can literally be muscled through the joiner and thickness to final width. I've been needing a zero clearance insert for this saw, and this will dramatically reduce the tear out that I get on the bottom sides of my crosscuts since I use the sliding crosscut table. And speaking of, I can get it locked in easy enough. In my opinion, I get a much better crosscut on the table saw versus any miter saw. There's a lot of cutting happening right now because I'm actually cutting every single part and laying them out so you can see them as a whole. There's a lot of people that, of course, expectedly don't understand how much work or how many parts go into one project. So for those people, here is this whole project laid out on the floor. Countless parts that require measuring, shaping, gluing, sanding, finishing, installing, and everything in between. Before we actually start the raised panels like I promised, one thing has to be checked. I want the thickness of the headboard panels to match the thickness of the plywood that will eventually be joined, and this thickness is slightly shy of 3/4. Well, this seems to be a common theme for me. I think I overfilled the dust collector again. Dude, again? I'm notorious for packing dust collectors to the brim with shavings. I should honestly just add sensors to these bins, but haven't gotten around to it. That wasn't too bad. Thankfully, the trip to the dumpster is fairly easy with the nice wheels on the bins. It would be even easier if winter wasn't winter in Colorado, but this year, it most certainly is. With all the parts roughly to shape, we can finally begin these awesome raised panels that I speak about. The bit that I'm using is a Haas, and pretty unique. I'll link it in the description below. With the fence directly in line with the center of the bit, I can take a first pass on the panels. With a bit this size, you want to gradually achieve the profile with 2 or even 3 passes. There's pass 1. Pass 2 will be with the bit at final height or just below. Then I'll move the fence back about a ½ inch or more to add some profile depth for pass 3. Dust collection and push blocks are a must, and a miter gauge even helps to stabilize the piece. Here's the evolution of the profile as we complete the steps. And here's every panel with the first profile complete. The rail and style bits that I like to get now are the adjustable ones. Each species of wood cuts differently, and if you can't adjust your fit, then some days it might be tight and other days it might be loose. The grooving bit is always first for me. Then the tenoning bit follows. The thicker stock, as you can see, will need extra work. The table saw takes care of that easy enough. The raised panels also need to be finalized, which the tenoning or coping bit also does. Then a final cleanup pass cleans up the inside edges of the grooves. These raised profiles often need some cleanup at the end to smooth over lines created by the multiple passes. Just check with an angled light for a perfect surface. I just bought this Dewalt atomic pin nailer, and there's something ironic that comes with it. This tag says, for best performance, use Porter cable or Dewalt branded pin nails only. But it comes with a pack of Bostiche pin nails, which is funny. Also, Dewalt says that you can shoot 5/8 to 1.5" pin nails. Even though I believe Dewalt is the one that revolutionized pin nail sizes, and they came out with pin nails as long as 2 inches, but their own gun can't shoot that length. I don't know, there's a lot of irony here, but I'm sure the pin nailer is going to work great. Sometimes companies just crack me up. I use a lot of Dewalt, but let me know what you think in the comments about Dewalt's irony. I went for a pretty tight fit on these joints, again because my bit allowed me to create a tight fitting tenon. And remember, the floating panels are actually floating this time because we aren't using stable plywood. So from the backside, I make sure the panel is centered, and I pin nail it with short pins to keep the panel captive in the center at all times. On a moving panel, it's better to have equal movement on each side from the center, rather than the total of that movement towards one side only. The reason why this is good practice is because if you have wood movement from just one side, then you'll get the finish cracking in between the frame and the panel if you sprayed too heavy and you got bridging. He may seem like he knows what he's doing, but you'll see here that some of the panels are too wide, so they have to be ripped thinner and reshaped on that side. That's better. I haven't mentioned why some of these are so thick, and it's simple. They need to have an 1.5" width when viewed from the side. As always, they are set somewhere where they will remain flat and coplanar. The headboard posts get flat panels, you can see that here. And make sure to check square on larger panels. There was no sense in checking square on the slender panels because I wouldn't be able to rack them back into square anyways. The headboard is similar, although it has 2 floating panels and the rails go the entire length of the component to make things simple, rather than stopping at the stiles. And Pinning the center is extra important on wider panels. With the first part complete, now the nightstands can be built. The face frames will be permanently attached to the raised panel sides we created. This process is similar to what I have shown before, with a few changes. I have to mark for dominoes where the rails will connect to the side panel, as it will become the style in this case. Then the rest of the cabinet box will be built around it, as you'll see. The box will be made with quality grade plywood, and I will rely heavily on pocket holes this time. No dados or rabbits here. I have to cut a 1/4 inch off the rear side of the raised panel because a sheet of plywood will be stapled directly to the back. Cutting this amount off will keep the cabinet panel in direct line with the riser panel above it. Then the exposed edge of the plywood will be covered by the headboard post. Be careful when sanding these things too. I ran over a corner and rounded it in a microsecond, mainly because the center is slightly higher than the frame, which is fine. So I use a good wood filler. Bondo would work great here too, then flat sand with a hard sanding block to restore the flatness, followed by sharpening the edges with a chisel, some touch-up sanding, and of course a bright light check. Everything is ready for assembly, so going back to how I designed this to fit in such a small space. These cabinets are only 11 1/4 inches deep, which conserves a lot of space in the room, solving part of the limited space conundrum. Although, in a design, you typically want the base to be deeper than anything on top of it, like shelving. Otherwise, it starts looking top-heavy, at least from a side perspective. So on this one, I made the shelving 1 inch shallower than the cabinet to solve that conundrum. This still leaves plenty of shelf room and keeps the visual weight more balanced. You can see here that I'm using pocket holes without the usual dados, and that's because dados would have complicated an already complicated cabinet. Sometimes it's just worth less brain damage. The wall side of the cabinet gets a plywood side, with the face frame extending out a bit so we can fit it to the wall later. A top stretcher gets mounted horizontally to avoid the drawer slides, as you'll see. Remember, the cabinets are mirrored versions. The backs will be temporarily pin nailed on for now, but they will come off for painting. I often leave a gap at the bottom for wall clearance rather than having the panel extend to the ground. Now these mini drawer slides can be installed. They are for a cute 9-inch drawer depth, and they barely fit in this cabinet. I'm shimming the front because the rear side has a mounting plate that lets the slide shift in and out. The back plates get mounted right to the 1/4 inch panel, and that's why the stretcher is out of the way here. To make the drawer boxes, I need thinner stock, and I ran out, so I'm going to be resawing some maple. A lot of woodworkers, including me at some point, are or were intimidated by resawing. And why is that? Because we all ruined a board or two with a drifting blade while trying to cut it into multiple boards. But thankfully, I have actually found the solution. I'm dead serious. This blade is your answer, and you've probably heard of it. These Laguna Resaw King blades have carbide teeth. I avoided these blades for years, assuming that they would have a wide kerf and that they wouldn't solve my drifting issues. But honestly, look at this thin kerf and perfectly straight line. The fresh cut surface is of course what you would expect from a bandsaw, no magic here, but watch this. Absolutely zero blade drift. One light pass on the joiner smooths the surface. I will link this blade in the description as well. Remember to pick the width and length of the blade that your bandsaw accepts. I'd like to say that I always sand the insides before glue up, but I don't always remember and I regret my life later. My method of joinery is different on these. Some glue and pin nails will hold everything together, just enough for me to add exposed dominoes from the outside. You can do this with dowels too, or just brad nails if you want. The dominoes will be painted over, but my OCD tells me to make them spaced evenly anyways. and I accidentally cut one on the wide setting, so I have to fill it with 2 dominoes. Problem solved, throw it all away. Now to cut them flush, I'll use a cool trick from one of my favorite channels, Matthias Wandel. If you set a stop that is raised out of the way, you can use it to control the placement of the drawer box for a flush cut. These cute things are done and can be clicked in, and the top trays can be made with some Baltic birch. Yeah, you heard that right. I know. I had some Baltic birch laying around from like 600 BC when we could actually afford it, and it's even 5/8. Is this even real? Oh, it's real, and it's happening.
Oh, I can feel it.
These trays are simple. They have edging that goes all of the way around to hide the undermount slides. Then the holes can be drilled for the retainers on the back, and the clips can be mounted to give them a test. They clip right in, and they're even soft close. The drawer faces can be mounted now that we have something to mount to. I usually oversize them a smidge so I can resize them on the table saw easily. The good old-fashioned card trick works like magic. Get it? You don't get it. The face for the tray has to be pinned on from the front. No biggie though, I can gently disengage it and run some screws in from the back afterwards. Doing a test fit now is helpful if I have to make any alterations. It's harder to do later. I am experiencing a tilting issue since the front is so heavy though. So I actually tilted the slides back a touch to compensate for that lean. The tops for these nightstands are simple, just 3/4 plywood with a 1/4 inch maple edging. I leave the edging long and flush trim it on the back side. Then I can flush the edging to the faces on the router table using a square clamped to the table for stability. And this works great until the end when I no longer have support. A quick sanding is helpful before offering a 1/4 inch round over on the 2 outside edges, making sure to do the other top in a mirrored fashion since it will be on the other side of the room. The shelves are also straightforward, so I'll breeze through them. They are 2 panels of 1/2 inch ply with 1/2 inch bracing on the inside to add thickness and bending strength. The second panel can be glued and pinned on, then a 3/4 maple face can be added. I'm just trimming them square here, but I'm leaving them about a 1/4 inch long in case I need that extra length at install. Some filler fills the pinholes, and these are finished. The header is nearly 12 feet long and will be connected to the risers as well as support crown molding and 2 surface mounted lights. Since I can't source plywood that's 12 feet long and wouldn't dare try to pick something like that up anyways, I will just join 3 pieces together. I use a domino and pocket hole trick because clamps would be nearly impossible along this length. I just make sure to clamp the 2 panels flush with one another before sinking the screws. This joining process actually came in handy because you can see that the 2 ends protrude further than the middle anyways. The face frame is 3 inches wide, which will be plenty for the crown to mount to. I can't believe after all these years, I still put my thumb in the danger zone of a brad nail. I guess I probably deserve a brad nail in my thumb bone. The miters are easy enough to cut on the miter saw. The long face can be mounted first, then the small return can be referenced from that edge. Perfect fit every time this way. Make sure to use pin nails only on the small items like this. Brad nails will usually cause splits. These miter springs will squeeze a lot of pressure on the miter and make it much tighter than pin nails alone. I'll link this set in the description because they are certainly worth their weight in gold, and we will be using these in a very unique way in a future project. I'm adding a few reinforcing blocks to keep the face frame square to the header, and 1/4 inch ply will act as a reinforcement for the 2 joints. Make sure to put nothing in these 2 areas if you're planning on putting in lights. And in case you are wondering, here's what it looks like when you pull these miter springs. Basically nothing at all. Flush trimming is a bit harder on something like this, so I get most of it with a bit and finish it off with a very sharp block plane. The 2 risers that go against the walls are extremely simple, done and done. With the headboard dry, we can join it to the plywood panel. First, I make sure the back is flat, because it will ride against the fence on the joiner. Might as well joint the plywood too. The tighter the joint, the better it will stand the test of time. The same domino and pocket hole trick can be used, although I don't recommend the pocket holes because they forced a misalignment with the panels, and this will come back to bite me. Here I am smashing a panel into alignment like a freaking caveman. Here's a hint though, it's not moving. We'll get back to that later when the glue is dry. The last piece that has to be fabricated is the cap for the headboard. The cap has returns on it just like the header, so a layout will help guide my cuts. If you're not comfortable doing a plunge cut on a table saw, don't do it. You can use a jigsaw, a track saw, even a circular saw. I'm taking it very slow here. You can tell by the smoke from the burning. The miter saw is good for the crosscuts, and a jigsaw finishes it off. Some cleanup will be necessary, but it will be worth it. Sometimes I route backwards, then do a cleanup cut going the correct way. The roundover also looks way better if it extends into the corner with a nice inside mitered look. Just go slow with the chisel and clean it up with a file and some sandpaper. It may look like garbage at first, just keep working it, then suddenly it will look perfect. It's time for everyone's favorite thing, final sanding. You can see here that I have to sand through the veneer on my plywood to get the panels flush, and the core sounds faster than the hard maple, creating an uneven surface, so Bondo to the rescue. I'm basically doing a drywall trick here where I skim coat the affected area, then I'll sand everything perfectly flat after it cures. And it comes out as flat as a still lake on an August morning at your grandmother's cabin while you're thinking to yourself, Bondo sure is amazing. Scribing the back of some of the components will tell me where they go later. The drawer faces can get a round over, and the back panels can gently be pulled on the cabinets. The different moldings can also be sanded, and everything is ready for finish. Here's another pro tip. Always start with less important components first, then work your way towards valuable ones. Any warm-up mistakes that are made or fine-tuning is done on pieces that are easily fixed. Also, when priming your airless sprayer, let the primer or paint run through your system for a minute. This tends to vacate some of the particles that have developed from the sprayer sitting for a while. A quick test shows that my pressure is not high enough. That's better, but I still turn it up a touch from there. I've already sprayed some pieces, so here's a drawer face. Edges first so the overspray gets covered with a wet coat. Then watch how the door is swaying. This can lead to bad coverage, so have a way to hold it still. These Envirolac products should lay down with minimal orange peel and will cure very smooth. For large panels like this, I like to spray them like the pros spray car roof panels. I push my way until I hit the halfway point, then go to the other side and pull the rest of the way. That way I'm always keeping a wet edge, and I'm keeping that sprayer perpendicular for even coverage. I also like to set face frames horizontal because they tend to have runs if I keep them vertical. If you're running low on primer, you can displace it with a bag of water or switch to a smaller container. And saving a few less important items until the end also will save you if you run out or if the catalyst kicks off earlier than expected. And with this stuff, if you let the catalyst kick off too soon, you might as well be spraying cottage cheese. Here's a quick overview of what I use to sand the primer. The random orbital is best for large, flat sanding, while the RTS is better for edges because it won't burn through as easy. The sanding block is best for touching things up, while the foam sanders are excellent at getting curved faces. The harder pad smooths better, and the softer pad gets into tight areas. And finally, the sandpaper gets into challenging corners. The top coat is Envirothane 200 untinted, and it's sprayed in the same fashion as the primer. If your final finish came out with a few dust nibs here and there, no problem. Then extremely lightly rub it with a very wet 3000 grit pad that you can purchase at an automotive store. Don't do more than 2 passes or it will start to affect the look and sheen. Now the back can be stapled on, and the drawers can be inserted. My screws have to be cut off on the back side since they protrude through the 1/4 inch ply. Finally, I can wrap everything up and transport it to the install location. On install day, I start by pulling the baseboard. Then the carpet can be cut out where the nightstands will go. Some shims ensure that everything is level. This is of the utmost importance. The right side needs to be scribed to fit the wall. Then it can be shimmed at the exact same height in reference to level. Both can be mounted to the wall, and the carpet can be stapled in a few spots where the base will cover it. The tops need to be scribed to fit the wall well now, but not mounted yet. I can find the correct height to mount the headboard by using a pillar as reference, then mount the headboard to studs with brad nails. A shim will support each outside edge where the pillars get mounted. Notice here how the pillar overlaps the headboard by about 3/4. Now the tops can be cut to fit in place, but still not mounted. You'll see why. The 2 risers can be temporarily positioned, and some tape is used to mark where the inside edges are. That way I can reference that tape for length and if things aren't perfectly square. One riser has to be scribed to fit the wall, then the shelves can be attached to it using the finish screws through the pre-drilled mounting holes. Some blocks hold the top up, and you'll see why these are handy in a second. I can lift the partial shelf unit into place and run a finish screw in the wall to hold it briefly. The other side can be positioned and screwed to the nightstand top. That's why this is being held up. Which unfortunately I attached the wrong side here. The large rail goes at the top. So the correct side is mounted and the whole thing can be dropped into position. Then everything is screwed to the wall. The other side is much more simple because I don't have the door casing keeping me from sliding the whole assembly in. So this side is all pre-connected and lifted into place. I'm using some wall anchors since this side doesn't have a stud where I need it. The header can finally be lifted into place to end the first install day. The next day I can cut where the lights will go, which is centered over each headboard panel. Then a wall cleat can be mounted to fix the header too. Before I fix it in place though, I drill holes that tell me where to drive screws from the top into the risers. Then with some patience and a right angle attachment, I get all 8 screws nice and tight. This took about a full hour. Then some brad nails to fasten to the cleat. The crown can be patiently cut and fit into place. Then the cap can be mounted to the headboard. This cove molding really finishes things off nicely, and that return looks great. The baseboard can also be mounted, and the hardware can be attached. I screwed these knobs on with cut-off screws because there is no backside to access a screw head. Lastly, some caulking and paint touch-up, and we are finally finished, and it's time for final shots. Hopefully I earned your subscription, and here's another awesome video to watch.